Welcome to my channel. Today, we'll take a look at 5 scary stories that'll make you think a lot when you're home alone. The Closet Visitor. A teenage boy was home alone. His parents had gone out for the evening and had told him to stay in the living room, watch some TV, and be good. But all he wanted to do was play his new video game. He sat down in front of the screen and soon became totally absorbed in what he was doing. Time passed quickly, and soon it was 2 a.m. He didn't hear anything downstairs, but then he started hearing what sounded like footsteps on the stairs. He turned down the volume on his game and listened intently. It sounded like someone walking around in his closet. He shrugged off the sound, telling himself it was just his imagination. Surely it couldn't be a burglar at this hour, especially not in his closet. In the morning after, of course, not sleeping a wink, he told his parents about the incident. They just laughed and said it must have been an animal. But when they went upstairs to check, they found a homeless man curled up inside the closet. Apparently, he had been living in there for several days, eating the clothes and using the closet as shelter. The family had no idea he had been in there. How did he get in? The closet was in the boy's bedroom, which was on the 2nd floor with a window. But how had he stayed hidden for so long? And how did he manage to get in and out without anyone seeing him? Was it really a homeless man or something more sinister? Maybe an escaped mental patient. Who knows? What we do know is that this next visitor was most unwelcome. No. 2. Toy Story. When her son was born, she put all of his old toys in the closet. She had meant to go through them and find the ones that were broken or outdated, but she just kept putting off the task. Years rolled by and her son grew up. He loved playing with the old toys and had no idea what was lurking among them. One day while playing, he pulled out an old trunk from the closet. As he opened it, he let out a blood-curdling scream. His mother rushed to his room and found him pointing to the trunk. Inside, lying on a bed of old clothes, was the preserved body of a little girl. She was wearing clothes from the 1940s and had a porcelain doll in her arms. Her eyes were wide open and staring, and her skin was as white as snow. Her mother screamed, dropped the cleaning supplies she was holding, and called the police. An investigation revealed that the girl had died of a drug overdose. She had been reported missing years ago, and somehow her body had ended up in the old toy chest. Whoever had killed her had obviously done so to protect her body. But why? And how did the body stay hidden for so long? Who knows? What we do know is that this next person got more than he bargained for when he decided to peek in a closet. No. 1. Mirror. Mirror. A young man was hanging out in his friend's apartment. He had come over to help fix a leaky faucet, but they had gotten sidetracked and were now just shooting the breeze. Suddenly, his friend disappeared into his bedroom. He could hear him talking and laughing, but then there was a crash and his friend let out a yelp. He tried to call out to him, but his friend put his hand over his mouth to stop him. He could tell by the tone of his voice that he was scared. Concerned, he went to the bedroom door and knocked, but his friend just screamed at him to go away. He tried to ignore his friend and went back to the living room. That's when he heard his friend start babbling incoherently. He then came out of the bedroom and fell to his knees in front of the closet. He started praying loudly. The young man was confused and concerned. He went back into the bedroom to check on his friend, but he wasn't there. The closet door was open, and inside, hanging from a hook, was a full-length mirror. The young man stared at it suspiciously. Then, suddenly, he felt cold air on his neck. He turned around and saw his friend standing behind him with a distorted expression on his face. He had a wild look in his eyes and was covered in blood. He lunged at the young man, who screamed and ran. He ran for his life, not stopping until he was outside the apartment building. He never looked back. To this day, he wonders if his friend is still trapped in that closet, forever reaching out to anyone who enters, trying to pull them into the mirror world with him. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon. Bye. What do you do when you hear someone knocking at your back door in the middle of the night? It was 2 a.m. and 17-year-old Destiny was home alone in her family's Texas farmhouse. Her parents were out celebrating their anniversary, which meant Destiny had the whole house to herself for the night. That is, she thought, until she heard it, a loud knock at the back door. Destiny froze. She didn't even know anyone who had a key to the house, let alone someone who would be out past midnight, knocking on the back door. The sound echoed through the large kitchen and made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. But then it happened again, and then again. Louder now. Her heart began to race. Should she call the police? No. They'd probably just tell her to stay on the phone with them and wait for the morning. So instead, she did the logical thing and called her neighbor across the street. "Hello," said Mrs. Henderson sleepily. "Is everything okay? I think someone's at my back door," Destiny whispered. "Can you come over and check?" "Of course, honey," Mrs. Henderson replied. "I'll be there in a jiffy." As Destiny waited for her neighbor, each knock grew louder than the last. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. She could hear her neighbor's car pull into the driveway and footsteps approaching the back door. "I'm so glad you came," Destiny exclaimed as she opened the door. "I was getting really scared." Mrs. Henderson peered through the darkness beyond the yard. "It's okay, dear. I've got my flashlight." She stepped outside. But before they could investigate, Destiny gasped. The backyard gate, which was usually kept closed and locked, was wide open, and in the soft dirt beyond, they could see a set of fresh footprints leading into the woods. "Oh goodness," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes widening. "This isn't good." She shone her flashlight down the path, but it was too dark to make out any details. Mrs. Henderson turned to Destiny and asked, "Do you have a baseball bat or something we can use for protection?" Yeah, I think my dad has an old one in the garage," Destiny replied, feeling a sudden surge of bravery. Maybe the person who had been knocking was just a lost hunter or a stranded motorist who needed some help. She grabbed the flashlight from Mrs. Henderson and said, "I'm gonna go check on my dogs. They might have run out the open gate." She could see better in the dark than her neighbor, thanks to her night fishing goggles, which were designed to enhance vision in low-light conditions. As she walked toward the garage, she shone the light around, trying to spot her 2 golden retrievers. Just then, she heard a twig snap in the darkness beyond the yard. Her heart skipped a beat. Whoever was out there was close. She spun around and started walking back toward the house, her eyes scanning the darkness. That's when she saw them, her dogs. They were standing at the edge of the woods, barking furiously at whatever was inside the trees. She could hear the animal growl. Was it a bear? Destiny took a few steps closer, her breathing becoming more shallow. Then she heard it again, a low growl that sent shivers down her spine. Taking a deep breath, she shone the flashlight into the bushes. The growl stopped abruptly, and when she looked closer, she saw it was just a large black plastic bag. Relief washed over her, followed by a surge of anger. Who would play such a cruel joke? But there was no time to dwell on it. She needed to get to the safety of the house. As she turned to leave, she heard a voice behind her. Having fun, Destiny. She froze. Who was that? She slowly turned around and gasped. It was the tall, skinny boy she'd seen riding his bike around the neighborhood earlier that day. He had a big grin on his face, but it faded when he saw the look on hers. "Ah, hey, Destiny," he said awkwardly. "Didn't mean to scare you." He started backing away, but she took a step toward him. "Why did you do that?" she demanded. "You scared me half to death." The boy shrugged. "Thought it'd be funny." "Well, it wasn't," she said, shaking her head. "You should be careful doing stuff like that. You could have hurt yourself, or worse." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess you're right." She watched him walk away and disappear into the darkness, and then she ran to the house, her heart still pounding from the scare. As the night wore on, Destiny couldn't help but feel uneasy. She kept hearing noises in the backyard, and each time she went to investigate, she found nothing but her dogs barking furiously at empty bushes. By the time her parents got home, she was exhausted and just wanted to go to sleep. As she lay in bed, she could still hear the distant sounds of her dogs barking. Maybe she should have just stayed on the phone with the police after all. Welcome to my channel. Today we will look at another creepypasta titled The Man Under the Bed. A girl was home for the weekend from college. As soon as she got back, she went straight to her room, locked the door, and started studying. Around 4 hours later, she heard some really light scratching sounds coming from her closet. At first, she thought nothing of it and continued with her studying until she heard the scratching again. It sounded like something small clawing at the wood, trying to get out. She told herself that it was probably just a mouse and tried to focus on her homework. But then the scratching stopped, and she began to hear what sounded like muffled sobs. She opened the closet door a crack and called out, "Who's there?" No response. Maybe it really was just a mouse. She tried to go back to her studying, but then the closet door began to open slowly. She screamed and ran out of her room to call her boyfriend. On the other end of the phone, he calmly asked her what was wrong. She could barely get out. "There's someone in my closet." Then she hung up and ran back into her room to hide under her bed. When she heard the closet door open, she took out her phone and turned on the flashlight. She peeked over the side of the bed and saw a pair of men's shoes. They weren't her dad's. Her dad's shoes were big and these were small. These shoes were definitely not her dad's. And then she saw his pants. The shoes matched the pants and the pants matched the shirt. The man was wearing all black and now he was rummaging through her things. She watched in horror as he took her phone, dropped it, and then smashed it on the ground. He took her laptop and tossed it across the room. She watched as he broke her things and destroyed her room. But why? Why was he doing this? What did he want? He kicked something and it made a loud noise. She gasped and he instantly froze. He listened for a moment, then grabbed her blanket and stuffed it in his mouth. He looked around some more, then went back to the closet. He took off his shirt, revealing a bunch of tattoos, then crawled back into the closet and shut the door. She stayed under her bed for a few hours, only coming out when she heard him fall asleep. She quietly left her room and went to the bathroom to lock herself in. When she came out, the man was gone. She immediately called the police and told them everything. She even showed them the destroyed room and the broken items. But when they checked the closet, it was empty. And that's where they found the man. One of the officers looked under the bed and said, "Hey, we got a break in here, guys." All the officers gathered around the bed, and one of them lifted up the mattress. There was a man hiding underneath. He had a knife in his hand and was growling, "Kill me." The officers drew their weapons and told him to come out with his hands raised. But he refused and instead lunged at them with the knife. They shot him 3 times before he stopped moving. He was taken away in an ambulance, but he didn't make it. The girl never found out who he was, why he broke in, or what he planned on doing to her. But she does wonder if he would have hurt her if she hadn't come out of her room to call the police. I think this story goes to show that you should always trust your gut instincts. If you feel like something isn't right, then do something about it. Don't just sit there and hope that it goes away. Also, if you ever find yourself hiding under a bed, then please know that it is okay to stay there as long as you need to. Sometimes it is better to be safe than sorry. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. A woman heard what sounded like a baby crying outside her window. She was home alone, and it was in the middle of the night. Naturally, she was a little freaked out, because she lived in a rural area, and she knew there were untenny houses or apartments nearby that had kids. So who was making the noise? It turns out it was a burglar trying to get inside her house. The weird thing was, she'd heard the baby cries multiple times before, but she always assumed it was just some trick her overly active imagination had played on her. But this time she was sure there was a rational explanation. When she looked out the window, she didn't see anyone. Then she went downstairs to check the back door, and that when she noticed someone had left muddy footprints on the glass. She wiped them off to get a better look and saw that they were actually partial prints, because whoever was out there had only stepped on the very edge of the threshold. Whoever had been outside her door had clearly tried to peer through the window, but when they saw their reflection, they ran off. She called the police right away, but when she told them about the footprints and how she thought someone might have been trying to break in, They told her to stay inside and not open the door for anyone. It turned out there had been several similar reports in the area that week, all of them involving fake baby cries in the middle of the night. As it turns out, thieves would record the cries of a baby and then use them to try and trick people into coming to the door. If the resident opened it thinking it was an emergency, the thieves would rush in and take whatever they could grab. Most of the time, though, the ruse didn't work. People either didn't hear the cries or simply ignored them. And if they did answer the door in the middle of the night, they were usually met by an empty porch and a quickly retreating figure. In our resident's case, though, the officers said whoever was outside her door must have been desperate. Because not only did they leave footprints all over her windows, they also tried to get in through the back door. Unfortunately, the only other thing they'd left behind was their muddy footprints, which gave the police nothing to go on. They stayed on the phone with her for a few minutes after that, asking her to keep an eye out for anything else. Put aside from the footprints, everything else was gone. No discarded weapons, no signs of forced entry, no other obvious clues. And since nobody had actually gotten inside her house, she didn't even bother pressing charges. Maybe the burglar was a parent trying to feed their kid and desperation, she thought. Or maybe they were just trying to take something that they felt entitled to. Either way, it wasn't worth the trouble of going to court. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Welcome to my channel. Today we will be reading from a subreddit, so let's jump into it. The TV static. It was the early 90s, and I lived alone in a one-story house in a rural area. My next-door neighbor had recently moved out, and the house had been empty for months. I was home alone watching TV one night, and it was one of those late-night horror movie marathons on the cable channel. Anywhere I was watching this movie with my mouth open, totally engrossed in it. Suddenly, the TV went to static. I assumed that the cable had gone out or something, so I got out of bed to go check the cable box. As I walked past the TV, I saw what looked like a faint reflection in the screen. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I stopped and stared at it, and it became clearer and clearer. It was a person standing in the hallway directly behind me. This was not possible since I lived alone and my front door was locked. It was also night, and the only light in the house was coming from the TV. And it wasn't like a silhouette. It was a very clear image of a woman wearing what looked like a long white dress. I quickly backed away from the TV and turned around to look for the person in the hallway, but there was nobody there. I remember freaking out a bit and starting to search the house for an explanation. Perhaps my wife had come home early from her business trip, but no, all the lights were turned off. The kitchen window was closed and locked, and there was no sign of forced entry anywhere. The only thing that was out of place was the back door, which was slightly ajar. I had never left the door unlocked, and I certainly would have heard it slam shut if the wind had blown it open. I don't remember exactly how I managed to calm myself down, but eventually I did, and I went back to bed without bothering to lock the back door. In the morning after, of course, sleeping very little, I got up and went to check the door again. It was still open, so I closed it and locked it. I tried to convince myself that it was no big deal and that I had probably just imagined the whole thing. But then I saw the reflection in the window, and it put an end to that theory. There was a perfect set of fingerprints on the glass, right where the reflection of the woman had been standing. They weren't my fingerprints. I immediately called the police and told them about what had happened. When they arrived, they entered the house through the back door without even bothering to knock, as one might do when responding to a call about a possible intruder. One of the officers checked the door frame and the door itself for signs of forced entry, but found none. The other officer asked me a few questions and then told me to come along, while he contacted the forensics team. We walked through the house, and the officer pointed out a few things that stood out to him. There were several small pebbles on the floor, which indicated that somebody had been dragged through the house. That wasn't possible because the only time I had seen the back door open, it had been pushed open from the outside, so whoever had been dragged across the floor must have done so from the inside. Then we went into the kitchen. There was a large pot hanging from the ceiling fan, and the officer noticed that it was loose. Apparently, whoever had been dragged through the house had hit the chain holding the pot, knocking it out of its moorings. Finally, we went out to the backyard, where the officer found some more pebbles and what appeared to be a dragging mark on the grass. It seemed that the intruder had entered the house through the back door, had turned on the TV, then walked through the house and out the back door again. We never found out who the intruder was or why she had broken into my house, but it has always stuck with me. To this day, I wonder why she came into my house, knowing full well that I was there. I was in that room with her, yet somehow she managed to go unnoticed. If she really wanted to harm me, I'm sure that she could have done so easily. Was it just some kind of sick joke? What was she trying to prove by creeping into my house, turning on the TV, and walking through the room without being seen? As a side note, this story has inspired me to write a short story, which I hope to publish one day. And now we get to hear from our first Reddit user. That reminds me of something similar that happened to my friend years ago. He was in the army and stationed at a base in Germany. He was home alone in his barracks room, and his roommate was out on a weekend pass. He heard a noise and turned around, and in the corner of his eye, he saw what he thought was his roommate standing in the doorway. But when he turned around to get a good look, it was just a wall, no doorway. The door was closed and locked from the outside. He tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination, but then he heard footsteps near his bed. He turned on the light, and there were footsteps. Again, he got out of bed and investigated and found nothing. He checked everywhere and didn't find anyone. He was home alone and had been for weeks because his roommate was supposed to be on leave until Monday. Well, he couldn't take it anymore and called the military police. The MPs searched the premises and spoke to him. They couldn't find anything either. And because they couldn't find anything, they told him to stop imagining things. He ended up staying in a hotel room for the night because he just couldn't bring himself to stay in the barracks room alone. When his roommate returned 2 days later, he told him everything that had happened. His roommate said, "Oh yeah," and explained that he had been absent without leave and had snuck back into the barracks to sleep. He asked if anything had been disturbed and was relieved that nothing had been taken or moved. But that's not the end of the story. A few days later, he was in his room when he heard someone calling his name. He turned around and saw the same vision of his roommate standing in the corner. He turned around and there was nothing there. However, the military police were called again, and they found that there was a secret passage between the rooms. It was covered and not visible unless you knew where to look. It seems that someone had used it because there were signs of recent use. They questioned everyone on post, but nobody admitted to having made the passage or using it. To this day, nobody knows who made the passage or why it was used. And that was our story from a Reddit. And if you like this content, check out the playlist where we read similar stories. And if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time.